Peikoff Wednesday, because we are here to discuss the works of Leonard Peikoff, and I have the honor, as I do every Wednesday, to join James Valliant, both an expert in philosophy and expert in Ayn Rand, and the better half of this particular podcast, because we are talking about the answers to questions from Leonard Peikoff's volume, Keeping It Real. And James, how are you doing this morning?
I am doing well, but you surpass me in many ways, sir, including your sartorial splendor today. I must say you are looking dapper and dashing.
Well, that is because James Valliant has selected for us today questions about love. By the time we do another one of these podcasts, Valentine's Day will have come and gone, and we can't let that happen. So, of course, it demanded a tie appropriate for the occasion and questions appropriate for the occasion, which you have selected, James, an outstanding list of questions today. Now, these are good questions on love, but love in Ayn Rand's life. And there's controversy in there, and there's questions there. No. We're going to get into the real good stuff today. And I'm kind of laying it out ahead of time because first, I have to take a moment. I have to take a moment to throw big thanks out there to several people who have been supporting the Ayn Rand Center UK. In particular, we have received super thanks, like a super chat after the fact. Generous super thanks from Marcelina Najar. Thank you so much for that. No question answer. She simply says thanks, which means we must be doing something right. Thank you for that. I also see in the chat today, Jeff Horizon is a new member of the Ayn Rand Center UK's YouTube channel. You can join and get access to things some folks don't have access to, and a way to support the Ayn Rand Center UK. Finally, the membership link is at the top of the chat, and any super chats that you put in, any questions or comments that you throw a couple dollars on, all of that goes right to support the Ayn Rand Center UK. And with Valentine's Day right around the corner, it's practically here. I consider Valentine's Day a season and not just a day. What a great day for a few super chats there too. Thank you for joining us in the chat. Looking forward to seeing your comments and questions. And I'm going to jump in, but I'm going to have more to say, and I know you two will too, James, about Valentine's Day. But I want to get right to the questions here, because you picked out some interesting questions, not the usual ones. For example, and this is topical because although the film's now a couple decades old, it keeps coming up. At the end of the 1953 version of the movie Titanic, and for folks who've seen the newer one, this will relate as well, there is only enough room on the lifeboats for the women. In one touching scene, a woman prefers to die with her husband. And the questioner asks Leonard Peikoff, would Ayn Rand have done the same thing, even over Frank's objections? That's very insightful for the questioner, because of course, Frank O'Connor would have said, no, you go and live. And, this is the woman who lived on Earth. The value of everything is, but Leonard Peikoff, interestingly enough, because to me, the answer to this one is not obvious. James, was it obvious to you? We've had a lot of questions where Dr. Peikoff has answered, and we thought, yeah, I knew he would say something like that. This one, I had no idea what the answer was. Were you surprised?
Well, I think I would have been surprised, and at least I would have had some thought about it. Back in 1964, when she gave her interview to Playboy magazine, she did say that she would take a bullet for her husband.
Good point.
And so I was already keyed into how high a value Frank O'Connor was in Ayn Rand's life. He was that serious about it. When we're that deeply in love, when the love is that profound and spiritual, and the longer it lasts, Ayn Rand and Frank O'Connor were married for over 50 years. And I don't think this is uncommon, but it's losing someone at that point. It's like losing an arm or a leg or both. It is devastating, and it can be more devastating even than, say, in my own life, I had to face a career change, an important career change, something I'd done for 18 years, and now I had to shift for just circumstantial reasons to something else. It was difficult. And, Ayn Rand places productive work as the highest central purpose in our life. And yet I believe, and I'm just going to autobiographically report this, for me, that career change was easier, although it was traumatic and huge deal. It was easier than it would have been for me to lose my wife, on Valentine's Day, we're going to celebrate our 26th wedding anniversary. Far easier for me to change a career. And I'm going to start getting sentimental and crying if I think about it. And I know that my wife has the same feeling. Yeah, we would have a battle at that lifeboat. It would be a struggle with me pushing her onto the lifeboat and her saying, I'm not going. There's no way. So in that sense, having lived that sort of love, I know her perspective. Let me put it that way.
Yeah, and I'm glad you said that, because a question that's come up a lot in Great Lakes Objectivists or just conversations with friends is, Ayn Rand says your central purpose, meaning your career, is the highest value. Does that mean that you should choose your job over your family, over your spouse?
Potentially your life.
Yeah, and I think what people miss is I have had jobs that were not important, as important. Your job is not your career. Your specific position that you have today is not your career. A specific job is not your central purpose. It may serve your central purpose, and you prioritize accordingly. But yes, I would, and I have left jobs that conflicted with my other values. Doesn't mean that I sacrificed my whole career. So that's been an important distinction to make. Now, in your case, you did actually have to make a change to career, which is a much harder decision to make. And I hope most of us don't find ourselves in that position, or at least not before it's the right time. So let me give Leonard. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
But there you see, I actually had other options. I can understand a person saying this was my one and only career. My life is almost over practically, and it being an existential crisis in effect. But I have other interests. I had other things. There were other values. And in that sense, I think most of the time, even a career change can be less traumatic and less devastating to the rest of your life. Holly is my fuel. She's my jet fuel. She's that, she powers me in effect. And if you were to ask me, your plane, you've got a wonderful plane there, Mr. Valliant, but it just can no longer fly. That would be just the most horrific hell on earth. Whereas a change in a career, if someone said you have to go from flying jumbo jets to flying, private Lear jets, or something, or from being a pilot or going to being an aerospace engineer, would be less traumatic, it seems to me, than losing the very source of what has become my primary emotional fuel over the last 2 decades. It's hard for me to even conceive of life, a decent, happy life, without Holly at this point. So I think that kind of frames the answer here, and why such an egoist, a life lover like Ayn Rand would have this attitude.
Yes. Let me go ahead and read Leonard Peikoff's answer. Would Ayn Rand go down with Frank O'Connor versus being the only one on the lifeboat? And Leonard Peikoff says, absolutely, without question. Her love for Frank, her attitude to him, was unquestionable for anyone who knew her. Her view had always been, you can survive any catastrophe except the death of a loved one, and she would never have taken a step to try to survive that. Actually, her life after Frank's death was sad. She was almost always unhappy, and she did not live very long after his death, as she had predicted. So she would have pushed him into the lifeboat and then jumped in after him. Well, yes, of course, if you've seen the Titanic films, you always think, couldn't, the person at least clung to the side, but I love the point. I love the point being made. There's a song that always gets me choked up, a song called White Flag by Dido, with the line, I will go down with this ship. And yes, I absolutely do believe that Ayn Rand would have gone down with the ship.
Yeah.
That's what had to happen.
Yeah. And I know there would have been that kind of tug of war between Ayn and Frank, just as I know there would have been that tug of war if such a thing ever occurred with me and my own wife. I'm sorry, that's love. That's when love really is an important part of your life. And of course, it's the goal. See, it's the experience of the positive love you have with them that makes life inconceivable, in effect, without them. And when you reach that state, of course, there's no question.
And for folks who don't know Ayn Rand that well, or at least the personal side, if that seems surprising, definitely catch the Phil Donahue interviews, his old show Donahue. He interviewed Ayn Rand twice, and the next question is about that. Leonard Peikoff was asked, in Ayn Rand's appearance on the Phil Donahue Show in 1979, so there were 2 appearances there, he asks her if she is not tempted to believe in heaven so that she can see her husband again. And she answers, I've asked myself that very question. Since she was an atheist, why wasn't she more emphatic and dismissive? And Dr. Peikoff's answer is short, so I'll read it right away. He says, my answer is that she was actually asking it in regard to herself at that time, her husband having just died. She always denied the possibility of heaven and said that it was no solace to believe your loved one is going there. But this was the first time in her life she actually experienced it. And she was not a dogmatist. She never took the attitude, well, objectivism doesn't believe in that, so of course it's out of the question. She said, well, let's see. Frank is dead. What do I want? And she could see right away that, well, she didn't want to believe in an afterlife, but she was always open to reality to the end. If something came up that she hadn't dealt with, she wanted to know how to deal with it. That's interesting to me because, and we'll talk about this in a minute, one of the things that came out in the book Letters of Ayn Rand was that first-handed and always fresh approach. She didn't stockpile a list of previous conclusions and then refer back to them like index cards when people would throw questions at her. Every time she was asked a question, it was addressed firsthand of, let me think right now about this, given what I know, but never by rote.
That's what makes her interviews and her letters, in particular, as you point out, such fascinating reads or such fascinating listens. The woman is listening to the person who's giving her the question. She's giving you a firsthand, fresh answer here. Now, her answer, I think, does give the answer that the questioner was looking for. She fills in right after that. If I believed that for 5 minutes, I would commit suicide immediately so I could get to him. And if I thought he was somehow being judged by St. Peter or God in some afterlife, I would want to rush there as quickly as possible to tell what a good person he was.
Yes.
So obviously she didn't even entertain the notion, because she said if I even took the idea seriously, she'd be gone there to help Frank in a heartbeat. So obviously she dismissed the idea out of hand. But what I find interesting, and Leonard's answer here is really, really revealing. She's considering it for the first time because, okay, now I really have lost my supreme value. What if there is this possibility of meeting him later on? What if he's still out there somewhere in some form? Well, if I believe that for 5 minutes, this would be my answer. But she's giving you a fresh answer. Nor was she ever dismissive of someone's hypothetical. For even if it was a semi-fictional hypothetical, she would think it through in terms of her own values and attitudes, but then draw you back to the metaphysical reality why it couldn't be. So I think both are true. And I thought she gave one of the great answers to Donahue for that very, very question.
Yes. A part of this too that I've just got to mention, because it's something that I love about how Ayn Rand handled these situations. Ayn Rand was on Phil Donahue's program, and she stood up for herself in ways almost unimaginable that some people have complained about on these shows. But as far as Donahue himself, it's interesting. She had enormous respect for him, and she answered him in earnest, as if all of his questions were in earnest. She gave him that respect. And she was asked about it, and she said, I think he's very good at what he does. He's a professional. As far as, this kind of talk format was, she didn't agree with his politics at all. Donahue was a flaming liberal. it didn't matter. When he was doing his job, when he was doing what he did, and he did it well, she respected that. She respected the man in that context.
Right, right. And the audiences that she faced, because, you know, Donahue's format was to ask folks from the audience most of the questions.
What a mix.
And what a mix. And so you get a wide mix of very, very hostile, rude questions with questions that were some insightful and some were positive to Ayn Rand. So what a mix. And it did result in a very fiery kind of interview. But again, you get an idea of Ayn Rand. You know, when Ayn Rand was challenged, that only hyped her up. That only energized her. So.
Yes, yes. So the third question is coming right up, but first I've got to give a huge shout out to Emmanuel in the chat, who's not only got a great question, but he's backed it up with a generous super chat to the Ayn Rand Center UK. So thank you for that. And he says, and this is going to relate back to a recent episode, he says, in general, should one's work always be a primary value and romance secondary? Work is where I derive my sense of self-esteem, and can't imagine replacing that with anything else, even love. Now, I right away have an answer to that, but James, maybe you want to.
Well, a central purpose is absolutely got to be the primary value here. But I'll relate you back to my answer earlier. There are more than one central purpose, hopefully, that we can develop. And even if you're totally lost, somehow circumstances make it so that the career you love you can no longer do. Even in that case, I would say that the potential for other options in developing a new productive purpose, because it's just you with you, or you to reality, right? I am more than, hopefully you are more too, than just that one career. I can understand, because I felt that with my career. This is my life. This is who I am. This informs most of my being and character. So it was a traumatic thing to change career, a hugely traumatic thing. But I realized that my deeper values meant that I was more than that, that there were other options that were available to me. I've grown so attached to the love of my life that thinking of a world without her is an entirely different thing. How do I replace her? She is a singular, unique value of such supreme importance that I have a hard time even conceiving finding an alternative to Holly, anything that could ever possibly. And the more you invest in it as life goes on, there'll never be another person in my life like that. It's already been too much emotional value investment and time investment. You may as well, like I say, just cut off my arm.
Right. And that gets to the answer we had on a similar topic a week or two ago, which is, suppose somebody put it to you, well, and I love that Emmanuel says always be a primary value, not the primary value. In a sense, it has to be the primary value because life has requirements, including being self-sustaining, earning self-esteem. But then he says romance secondary. I guess secondary is the right word, but to me, it's not primary secondary. It's more like asking somebody, you have to give up one. Do you want to give up ever having food or ever having water?
Right. That's more what it's like. But it's also, I think, apples and oranges. I think it's a category error of some kind. Yes. Because while each of us, whether or not we ever find true romantic satisfaction in our life, we need it. Whether or not, it's an absolute necessity for the individual, and it plays a specific role in the hierarchy of setting all of our other values. And it affects even our relationships. So who I am, people identify themselves with their career, and to some extent, that's a great thing. And it's, I'll just tell the story. Holly, when she and I were courting, she would come and see me do my work as a trial lawyer. She'd come see me do a murder case, for example. And she saw me in action doing that. And there was an amazing kind of visibility that we shared from that. And so it was part of me. It was part of me that she was falling in love with. It was my values and the virtues I was exhibiting, getting those values that she was seeing in me. And getting that kind of visibility was huge to that. Now, on the other hand, she is so unique in these, once I've established that it's much, much harder for me to think of trying to cope and find there's no replacement for her. There can be no replacement for her. Whereas with my career, even though it is the value that sets the rest of my hierarchy, and you're right, it's the primary means of my self-esteem. But I can find something else. Even if it is a lesser value, it's still a high value, my career, and it's still part of living my life. So while one is supreme in one context, absolutely, another is irreplaceable in another.
Yes.
They're two different categories.
Yeah, and I hate to let Emmanuel take over the whole show, but he's got great questions. He follows that up with very thought-provoking. Sounds like you ought to have two primary values, and the short answer is no, but it depends on what you mean by primary values. They're so different. As you say, it's a category error. They're so different. It's like the earlier question that brought this up, which is more important, your spouse or your children? You can't draw the comparison. It's like you'd rather lose an arm or a leg.
Right. Two irreplaceable values. And that's what I mean. When something, a specific thing or person, or, you know what I mean? We're talking about something very particular that cannot be replaced. Right. A child, a spouse. How do you replace that individual? You cannot.
And if there's one more thing I could say, as Emmanuel follows it up with another generous super chat and says, so helpful. Thank you so much. My mental wheels are spinning. A thought that might help those wheels get in the groove is the other thing about your central purpose, meaning your career, is that it is productive and it makes life possible. It sustains your life and it causes you to have self-esteem. And the difference between that and romance is more of an effect. You earn somebody's love, you earn their respect, you earn their affection, whereas productive purpose is actually taking action to go forward. Romance, love, is the reward for that, for having created your character, the kind of person you are, the kind of person somebody will fall in love with. And it's another reason why not only is it a category error, but there's no contradiction between the two. As you create your own personality, including your ambitions, that is when you find love, and it can be enduring because it has grounding, it has reason. There are reasons people are in love with you. So again, it's not an either or, and I certainly hope most of us don't find ourselves in an either or situation where the only way we can pursue our career is to mute our romances. Right.
Quite the opposite. They intensify one another. But they're different parts. They're different values so high up on the rank, but they have to be treated differently. Individual persons who become that great a value to you are just irreplaceable and different than a career, which is, as you say, just a necessary part of life.
Yes. Yeah. So huge shout out to Jeff Bannister, who was in the super chat with a generous $20 and says, sounds like a great show. I love watching you later, gentlemen. Got to run now. Cheerio. I happen to know that Jeff often has a schedule conflict. He's very generous with his after chats as super thanks. So thank you for that, Jeff. When you hear this show later, you will hear me say thank you. And I do genuinely appreciate it. Emmanuel is in for a third time. So very, very generous, and says, perhaps life requires work. Romance is the reward of a job well done. I like that. I like the way it's, I don't know if I'd put it exactly the same way, but it sounds like,
but it's the basic idea he's got right. Yeah, in effect, there's like a cause and effect relationship.
Yes,
there really is. Yeah.
It's exactly right, except that it's mutually reinforcing. So it's more back and forth, or maybe a spiral, we could say.
Spiral, exactly.
But exactly right. And in a this is going to be interesting, because see how this relates to the idea of, well, career and romance. Leonard Peikoff was asked, question number 3, was Frank O'Connor ever jealous of the love Ayn Rand had for her male characters? Did Frank ever feel insecure about being compared to those characters?
Ayn Rand would say, and she said in many letters, and she said in many contexts, Frank was her rock. Frank was the inspiration for her male heroes. Frank was the guy who gave her she tells the story, for example, in her 25th anniversary edition to the Fountainhead. 25 years into the Fountainhead, she wrote an introduction to the new edition, and she explained Frank's role in literally saving the Fountainhead. He, in effect, played Howard Rourke to her Dominique when she got particularly depressed at one point, and she wanted to give up riding the Fountainhead because the world just seemed so awful. So in a kind of a Dominique way, the world is just too awful for the Fountainhead. She just wanted to give up. And she explains how Frank spent the entire night talking her out of that, how you can't give up the world to those you despise. And he was, in effect, playing Howard Rourke to her Dominique, if you know that novel. And you can see that his attitude, his psychology was that, in effect, of Howard Rourke, especially in relation to Ayn Rand. He was her rock. He was her inspiration. As she said in another letter, Frank will always be the model for all of my male heroes. So it's funny to ask the question about him being jealous about male heroes. It's funny. Why would you be jealous of literary reflections of you that your wife is writing, which is in effect what she's doing?
Yes. So it's no surprise that Dr. Peikoff answers, no, he admired them too. They were great aspects of art, which he thoroughly appreciated and enjoyed. She had the same attitude, He painted women. Remember, he was a painter later in life.
Right.
He painted women, naked women.
Naked women.
And she wasn't in the least bit jealous. If anything, she would say, oh, you didn't put quite enough red in that corner. But the idea of jealousy never came. And Leonard goes on, Frank, and I say this literally, never compared himself to anybody else.
Anyone.
He had tremendous confidence. And the idea of worrying about whether he was better than, or worse than, or the same as literally, it literally would not occur to him. It would be of no significance to him. If he did a painting and you said, well, that's better than Peter Keating's, he wouldn't get a kick out of that because, Keating had no value to him. And if you said it's not as good as Renoir, well, that wouldn't bother him either. He'd say, well, I'm doing my thing, my way, and the best I can. What's the relevance of what Renoir did? These kinds of comparative standards simply did not apply to either of them. And I think Ayn Rand explains that in The Fountainhead. Unquote Leonard Peikoff. And that's certainly the impression I get about everything about that relationship, about that lifelong marriage.
Yep.
It was exactly that way, as you say.
Leonard, he was the quiet confidence. He really was. And you really couldn't compare him to other people. And like Howard Rourke, he mostly didn't care what other people thought at all. He is the source for that famous line from The Fountainhead, when Ellsworth Toohey asks him, well, now you can tell me what you really think of me, Mr. Rourke. And he responds, but I don't think of you. Yes. Howard Rourke's line there, Ayn Rand lifted from Frank O'Connor in a slightly different context. Yes. If you look at just the name, as I like to point out, the hero, the happy hero, this personification of joy and love of life that is Francisco d'Anconia in Atlas Shrugged. Francisco d'Anconia, Francis O'Connor is the name of her husband. Obviously, he's a reflection. Again, one of those reflections. But the point is that he wouldn't even compare himself to a reflection of himself. He could see that Ayn Rand was reflecting him in the heroes, but it wouldn't matter who it was, whether as a painter, whether it was Renoir or Peter Keating that he was being compared to. It's like, so what? I want to refer to yesterday's wonderful Artful Tuesday with Ann and Kirk. They interviewed Mike Berliner, the founding director of the Ayn Rand Institute. What a wonderful guy. When I was a teenager, the first, serious objectivist that I ever got a chance to meet in LA, Mike Berliner, and he's the editor of the Ayn Rand letters. And I absolutely recommend Artful Tuesday yesterday. One of the things he noted is that Ayn Rand has a letter there where she's writing to an author why you shouldn't try to write a bestseller, why that's doomed in effect, if you're going to aim to write a bestseller. And there's something relevant here. There's something relevant here. Ayn Rand would never compare herself, you see, to another author. She's going to write the most interesting story with the most interesting characters for her. That's what her values were when she's writing, not, oh, I'm going to impress the most number of people, or this is going to be the most popular in our current culture. No, that's doomed from the outset.
Yes, so good. So, see, that one speaks for itself, but there's also so much to say.
So much to say.
So let me jump right to question number 4, because this was a quirky one. This was a quirky question, but of course the answer is interesting. Leonard Peikoff was asked on his podcasts, should I be happy? See, this is going to go to the letters discussion from yesterday. Should I be happy that Ayn Rand found no lover in Russia and therefore had no reason to remain there? Now we all know that Ayn Rand came to America when she was in her early 20s. And the premise of the question is that she didn't find romance in Russia, and her first love was Frank O'Connor, who she met shortly after coming to the U.S., coming in through New York, going to Chicago, and then into California right away. But that kind of presumes a lot. And Leonard Peikoff says, I would say no, because she would have come anyway and brought him along. Her life was not luck. She knew exactly what she wanted and pursued it. If you take any side circumstance and say, well, if it hadn't happened, should I be happy? Well, you'd have to say, for instance, I'm really happy that Ayn Rand knew rotten businessmen like Orrin Boyle, because then she could write so well about them.
And she had met several rotten Orrin Boyles.
Then he goes to an extreme example. He says, or how about this? I'm happy her parents chose to stay in Russia and be slaughtered by Stalin because that gave her a really firsthand grasp of mysticism and statism. I mean, these things are ridiculous.
Right.
If she had the mind she had, she would have reached her essential ideas no matter whom she met or what happened to her relatives. And she would have seen that those ideas got out and were published one way or another. So the accidental misfortunes do not make you happy for the genius who surmounted them, nor was it the misfortunes that made her the genius. Absolutely right.
Yes.
It's almost deterministic to say, well, Ayn Rand she wrote what she wrote and she thought what she thought because of the things that happened to her. Well, we are not determinists.
No. In fact, most of the people who fled Russia from the communist revolution did not end up with Ayn Rand's ideas. There were a bunch of Eastern European immigrants who came to America, in particular came to Hollywood in the 1920s and stuff. And most of them had very different ideas from Ayn Rand. It wasn't that conditioned background. You know, Ayn Rand was in her teens was friends with one of Vladimir Nabokov's sisters. And you look at the difference between Vladimir Nabokov or the arguments she had with his sisters and Ayn Rand. No, the mere fact that you had a similar context from Ayn Rand would in no way guarantee you had anything remotely similar to Ayn Rand's ideas. At all. No, and more than that, but when she was a teenager, she'd already fallen in love, in effect, with the American system of government when she was taught at school its basics. And then when she saw films from America, she developed this aesthetic love, you know, for the American cities and skyscrapers and so forth. So she had both, you know, actual political values and an aesthetic value to America that was already growing in her before she came to America. Now think of this: she came to America as a woman she's a 21-year-old woman in 1925. She's migrating to America, a woman alone, 21, in the 1920s, halfway around the world to a country where she barely speaks the language, determined to become an artist in that new language. No, she was so single-minded and career-minded, and she wanted to get into America so badly that, yeah, she pulled tricks herself to get out of Russia, and she would have tried to get, if she had fallen in love with someone, she would have tried anything to get him out as well. But one of the things that we learn about Ayn Rand from her own autobiographical statements that she made in her life was that she did have a crush in Russia. She did have a potential romantic interest in Russia, a guy named Deckerman. And she said he was the inspiration for Leo, in one of the main male characters in her first novel, We the Living.
So this gets us to the next question, and also to that earlier discussion from yesterday on Kirk Barbera and Ann Cicollella's show, because you're exactly right. This does come up. Question number 5. Did Ayn Rand ever suffer from unrequited love? And Leonard Peikoff says, really, you should not be asking this question, and I have no business answering it because it's of a personal nature. Now, remember, Leonard Peikoff knew Ayn Rand for years while she was still alive. He wouldn't dream of answering a question like that. But, he respects now her place in history, he says. But after all, it's about 30 years now since she died. I do have a bit of knowledge. This is Leonard Peikoff answering. Very fragmentary, and I never talked about it to Ayn Rand, but just a few fragmentary scraps. But I have gathered that she did have a boyfriend in Russia before she came. They were teenagers. His name was Leo. When she wrote We the Living, she said that she disliked the name, but because of the Leo in Russia, who in her mind was a stylized version of the one in We the Living, she had to use his name. That's just one evidence of the relationship. As far as I could gather, it was more on her side than on his, though he was not indifferent. In that sense, it was to some extent unrequited. If you want to see her feeling, there's a letter to him early in her book of letters as to what she would do for him if he came to the United States. It's pretty clear how enthusiastic she was. He ended up dying in a communist labor camp. And you might be interested to know that in the last years of her life, this is 60 years later, she talked to me in answer to a question, and I asked her if she could name the people she had known in her life who were of the greatest personal importance to her, and his name was one of the top ones. So interesting comments from Harry Binswanger recently about, for example, the actor Hans Gudegast. Eric Braeden is his stage name.
Right.
Ayn Rand did experience romantic feelings at the very beginning and at the very end of her life, even at the end when she knew it was impractical. It didn't matter that it wasn't going to lead to anything. This was as much an artistic as a romantic reaction.
It was an aesthetic reaction, really, to the actor at the end. Yeah.
Yes. In that regard, I've got to read a quote from Ayn Rand. From The Conflicts of Men's Interest, she says, "A rational man knows that there are no conflicts of interests among rational men, even in the issue of love. Like any other value, love is not a static quantity to be divided, but an unlimited response to be earned. The love for one friend is not a threat to the love of another, and neither is the love for the various members of one's family, assuming they have earned it. In the most exclusive form, romantic love is not an issue of competition." I love that.
I love that answer. Any relationship between any two human beings is as unique as their fingerprints. To be jealous of a relationship that someone has with someone else is to be jealous of something you can never have. You can never really be part of. It's to be jealous. Jealousy just doesn't, in that sense, make any sense. My love for a child, or my love for my spouse, or my love for my friend, or my love for my crush on some actor I see on TV, right? How can they possibly be in threat to one another? How can any of those different kind of loves be a threat? As I say, it's almost like different categories. It would be like you said, okay, pick breathing or eating. What do you want to live without? How can your values be in conflict? if they're values, they stem from your values and they all play a part in your life. I wouldn't want to take away, far from being jealous, I wouldn't want to take away any friendship my wife had, any love for anything she had in her life. Quite the opposite. That's part of all the wonderful values that she is and part of what I'm responding to. I'm not threatened by her other values, her other human values. How could I be? I love her. I love all that she is. Dr. Peikoff's answer is just a beautiful one there.
Yes.
Really, really, really is. You know, and I want to again refer to the interview yesterday that Kirk and Ann did with Mike Berliner. Ayn Rand never learned the fate of Lev Beckerman, the guy who inspired Leo in We the Living. She never did. She learned about the fate of her parents. Her sister came to America in the 1970s briefly. And so she learned how her family were killed during the Stalin regime. She never learned that Lev was executed by the KGB. And that was the kind of fear she had for her teenage friends that she left in Russia, the people she associated with. She thought that she herself might have ended up in Siberia or executed had she stayed in the Soviet Union. And she certainly feared that for the people that she positively interacted with in Russia. Unfortunately, it's true. Her early love interest as a teen was, as she might have feared, executed by the KGB, as Mike Berliner explains. But they only found that out after Ayn Rand's death. And in fact, after Mike did the first edition of the letters to Ayn Rand. So again, I want to highly recommend that interview from yesterday. It's an outstanding one. And like Mike says, I'm kind of glad that Ayn Rand never learned the actual fate of her boyfriend from Russia.
Yes, yes. You know, that topic of the multiplicity of romantic feelings reminds me of a quote from Robert Heinlein, who was an admirer of Ayn Rand and even inserted her in one or two of her characters in his stories. He said, "The more you love, the more you can love, and the more intensely you love, nor is there any limit on how many you can love. If a person had time enough, he could love all of that majority who are decent and just." Now, compared to Ayn Rand's more exact statements, that's a bit of an exaggeration.
A bit of an example, but I love the thought. I love the impulse. How can one love be a threat to any other love? And the more we love, the more we're capable of love. The more our love machine is greased and well oiled and it is working efficiently, the more intensely we can love. Robert Heinlein also said that jealousy was the opposite of love. Love is that condition where the values, the interests of that other person become your interests.
That's right.
And
love is
again,
that condition in which the happiness of another person is essential to your own. Basically, if something's wrong, what is the line from the song? If something is wrong with my baby, something is wrong with me. It's a great song lyric, but it's absolutely true. If you love somebody, and this is more broad than romantic love, you can't be happy if you know they are unhappy. Right.
Robert, if something happened to you, I would be in distress. If something happened to one of my good friends, I would be in distress, just as I would if something would happen to my sister or my mother or my wife. I mean, but again, they're all different values in my life, but such high values that their well-being is an essential part. I've incorporated it into my own values to such an extent that I'm going to be happy if they're really in trouble, if that makes sense.
Oh, yeah. It's not the definition of love, but it is an absolutely reliable barometer.
Yes.
If something bad can happen to somebody and it doesn't affect you, then you need to question if you really value them at a value that could be called love.
Right. That's why our, fair weather friends are the ones to be distinguished from those who are really there for you. That says something. They really are affected if you're in trouble. And if they can, they're willing to help. Now, that's a different kind of friendship. Right? That's real love. I'm part of their selfish values. Yeah. And that's the curious paradox here. So many people think of selfishness as being to the exclusion of anyone else.
Yes.
Any glance at human nature any mere glance at anyone you've known in your life or in the course of human history, you realize that human beings are among the most, the most supreme selfish values that can be in my life. Selfishly, there are certain people in this world who are among my supreme values. And if they're not, I want things to go well for them. Maybe not in as direct and an immediate way as I want things to go well for me, but as an expression of how I want things to go well for me. If things aren't going well for you, Robert, they ain't going well for me.
Yeah. It's the strangest thing. I see this in the coaching communities, and I was going to say stoicism, but it's almost a parody of stoicism. The idea that strength means not caring. Selfishness means that you don't care. What does it mean to be self-interested? It's to hold your values the highest, including that value of other people, the supreme value of the people who are the most close to you. I can't be happy if the things I care about are destroyed. I certainly can't be happy if the people that I care about are unhappy.
Yeah, and insofar as those Stoics or Buddhists are trying to get us to be happy about not having values and not caring and being in a position where we'll never feel the suffering or grief of its loss, means that you're never going to be in the position to enjoy its value when it's there.
Yes. Now, we're talking a lot about losing a value, but the flip side of that, and I think what most of us should care about, is actually celebrating, enjoying, appreciating those values. And in that regard, James Valliant, you tacked on a sixth question today, which Leonard Peikoff did not answer, but I think is a great question that you brought on. Because you said, and this is a question, I've done whole lectures on this. I did a lecture called Weekends and Holidays on this. Isn't Valentine's Day just an artificial commercial invention, a, quote, Hallmark holiday, unquote? A Hallmark holiday not worth celebrating, or just an unnecessary cause for sadness to those without a romantic interest in their lives? Now, I have every sympathy for the latter. And Lord knows I've been in that position before many times in my life. And that feeling that, oh my God, Valentine's Day is coming, and I am so lonely right now that
I don't have a date for Valentine's Day.
Exactly right.
Right.
So it's a great question that you asked.
You know something, when I remember times in my 20s when I didn't have a date for Valentine's Day, but I didn't end up complaining about Valentine's Day. I actually thought of Valentine's Day in a positive way, as one day maybe I will be able to enjoy that. Next Wednesday, it will be my wedding anniversary. We chose Valentine's Day on which to get married. So it's good for her husband's memory too. He doesn't forget. Anyway. So apart from that practical consideration, it's going to be our 26th wedding anniversary. It's not that we thought there was any particular significance, to the middle of February. It's, some people pick June weddings because it's, the beginning of summer. It's a nice sunny day. You'll probably have, but it's not that there was some mystic significance, like Christians, this is the birth of Jesus or something. No, you pick a day though on which to celebrate a human value. What the heck is wrong with that? For me to say, even when I'm in a situation where I don't have a date on Valentine's Day, to say that I don't like Valentine's Day or the idea of a Valentine's Day as such. Now you're traveling from hey, I don't have this value, so I'm a little melancholy on Valentine's Day, to nobody should have this value and no one should recognize this. No, in fact, when I didn't have the date, I wanted those who were in love to celebrate it, to get into each other. Those public displays of affection that people don't like, or that they're socially questionable about. I love that. There's nothing wrong with that. Even when I'm not in a relationship, show me your love. It's like the achievement thing in the Fountainhead. I haven't yet achieved anything, says the young composer. He sees the achievement of Howard Rourke, and now it makes all that possible in his own mind. When I was a little kid, I would watch old-fashioned musicals that would have love stories in them. It sort of created, before I ever fell in love, created in my mind what love could be and how much I wanted that in my life.
Yes.
Far from resenting Valentine's Day, or far from causing an additional happiness because they're out there kissing and smooching on Valentine's Day and exchanging gifts and I'm not. It gave me an ambition. I want that. If I can get that in my life, I will make that part of my life. Part of it is, it's being melancholy if we don't have a date, and there's nothing wrong with being melancholy because you don't have an important value in your life. On the other hand, if it transitions into I resent that whole day in which lovers are celebrating their love, then maybe you've crossed over into a hatred of the good for being the good, or you're now dancing with nihilism and wanting to destroy the value rather than seeing it as no, I'm inspired by it. I'm going to aim for that value. Two different states altogether.
Excellent. Excellent. We have a super chat in from Michael Sweet, generous one, who says, I had the children conversation with my wife. The question, is it a selfish or a selfless value? Her eye-opening expression was wonderful when realizing the selfish value holds true. Thank you for that, Michael.
Thank you for that, Michael. That was
Love to
really
hear when a conversation like that happens and comes out just that way, as it should.
Yeah, and for the last two Peikoff Fridays, we were asking those kind of very questions. So thank you. That was the important point I think we made.
Just so. Those two episodes before, oh my gosh, the one with Catherine Dickerson to cap that off.
Yes.
So good. If you have not caught the last couple episodes of this show, go back a week. Trust me, you missed something important. We also have a super chat from Kindred Amy, somebody I know very well, who says Valentine's is second Halloween. So you can imagine what Valentine's Day looks like in our place.
Well, Halloween is the standard of all holidays and celebrations for Amy.
Yeah, it's Halloween Christmas and Halloween New Year's, and especially Halloween Valentine's. She says Valentine's is second Halloween, and happy anniversary, James and Holly. Well, there you go.
Well, thank you very much, Amy. Thank you. And I know I can thank you for Holly too. She loves you.
Now, as I say, I've talked about this topic of Hallmark holidays before. So I'm just going to give 3 quick points on that because you've pretty well covered it, James. 3 points that I want to make about that is, first of all, there are right ways and wrong ways to do anything. So yes, if Valentine's Day is a holiday that feels like a burden or an obligation, or if you're by yourself this year, it feels like a weight on you. There are right ways and wrong ways to do everything. Find the right ways. If you don't have a Valentine this year, put your time, your energy, that box of chocolates or flowers, or just going out for a nice meal. Do that with your children, your son, your daughter, or your parents if they're still around, your mother, your father, or a friend of yours who also doesn't have a Valentine this year. There's so many right ways to do that you don't ever have to do, quote unquote, what everybody does. That would be my second point, is it should absolutely be first-handed. This is not something that has been imposed on you by the gods of holidays. Do it the way it works for you. Again, there's a right way and a wrong way. Do the right way through your own firsthand values. And third, that gets us into the fact, you say this is a Hallmark holiday? You mean it's a man-made holiday? You mean that there are holidays that aren't man-made? Well,
right. Tell me about that non-man. Well, see,
exactly. They are all man-made.
If you believe there's some religious or metaphysical significance to this date, right? Like religions do with their holidays, right? That's what all religions do. There's some metaphysical significance to this. No. They're all man-made. They're all man-made. The question is it for a real value that people can share? That's what's important about it. Exactly. Ceremony and ritual play an important part in human life. They really, really do. But they're just ceremony and ritual, but they're serving us a psychological function, psychological function of commemorating, like art does. It concretizes an abstraction so big that you really can't absorb it all at once or consider it all at once unless you do reduce it to a concrete in an analogous way to art. So by celebrating someone's birthday, for example, yeah, it's non-arbitrary. That was the date they were born. But to celebrate every year on that date, it's a sort of an artificial way, if you will, of celebrating the fact that this person is around. They're alive. They were born, and they've made it another, orbit around the sun. Hooray! Let's get balloons and eat cake. All right. Those kind of acknowledgments are a concretization of a broad abstraction that person can be. And so, no, I think they're important. In fact, it's important to take a moment out of our day or our year or our decade to mark a milestone if it is really a supreme value in our lives.
Exactly right.
We're not going to emotionally experience it. Take time to look your lover in the eye and say, you have made my life so much better, and I want to do something special for you today. That's a good thing, it seems to me.
Yes, it's interesting because some people will respond, and it's true that some of these holidays do have to do with specific things that happened in history. So, for example, Independence Day, we celebrate July 4th because of what happened on July 4th, and I get that. If you want me to make that arbitrary for you, consider holidays that are only there because of the change from the Gregorian to the Julian calendars. I can still tell you that it's all man-made, but my point would be the ones that weren't based on a specific date, that, for example, Thanksgiving, whatever happened in November in the past, it certainly didn't happen on the fourth Thursday of the month, changing every year, like Martin Luther King Day somehow is always on a Monday. It's all man-made, and the fact that it's man-made is a good thing, not a bad thing.
Right.
So yes, if Valentine's Day is not your favorite holiday, it's time to rethink that. And not that you're wrong, but just that you can choose now, oh yeah, I'm going to make this my holiday. Here's what it's going to mean in the context of my life. Here's how I'm going to do it so that it's all good, no guilt, no burdens, no feeling of, oh, I didn't make it a big enough holiday, but just all good. If you've got a mate, a spouse, a Valentine in your life, have that discussion with them ahead of time so that there are no expectations that aren't going to be met, and let them know, I love this holiday. Here's what I'd like to do with it. Find out what he or she is interested in, and you can both decide, here's how we're going to make it all good. So, James, I love your question. Is it just a Hallmark holiday? I would take out the word just.
Right. And the commercial aspect of it is a wonderful aspect of any of it. So it would be better to not have, we're watching television, they're doing these jewelry commercials, for the different jewelry stores, and they're talking about love. And of course, this is the time for that, right? So would it be better not to have any gifts that we can give the person we love? Would it be better that we don't have Hallmark cards that we can't say to the people, send to our Valentines and say, no, I love you? Would it be better not to have a romantic set, a hotel or a restaurant where you can go have a romantic getaway with you? No. Commerce provides us the material means by which we can commemorate, by which we can celebrate, by values we can exchange. Yeah, and I know material values are on a different order when you love someone to the spiritual values, but at least it gives me a means of indicating symbolically and doing what I can to say how much that person means to me. I am grateful for Hallmark. I am grateful for all the restaurants that are going to be open on Valentine's Day. I'm grateful for all this commerce that is associated with these holidays. They actually give us the physical and material means of expressing it. Far from being just a Hallmark holiday, I want to go out of my way and say thank you. Thank you to all those selfish producers out there providing a range of values that are options for lovers out there to help express and symbolize and give some physical form to the spiritual values that the other person represents to them. So thank you, capitalism. Thank you, Hallmark. Thank you, commerce. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with making yourself happy, comfortable, giving gifts, celebrating, and so flowers, candy, take her out to dinner. Whatever your means is, bless those people who provide us those material means of celebrating and expressing.
Yes. And I've got to say real quick, in the chat, Christopher Smith, the musician Christopher Smith, is saying romantic love isn't new, but its acceptance in culture is kind of new, isn't it? To selfishly pursue who you want. Then he says, I don't care what my parents or my pastor or the government thinks. I love this person. And it's a whole conversation we could have about how in modern times, the defining aspect of marriage is romantic love. That didn't always used to be the case.
That is true. Romantic love, as we understand it, is a really contemporary, maybe I can go a little more and say modern phenomenon of, and I would say the Industrial Revolution has done. I mean, when you look back on the different forms of love, and the different ways in which love is a threatening, dangerous thing sometimes in ancient literature. It's a, whoa, yes, you're out of control. You're the madness of love and how love can create all this tragedy. Oh, in Renaissance times or medieval times, their romantic approach would be always this unrequited love. You know, like the classic example, King Arthur, his Queen Guinevere, and Guinevere falls in love with Lancelot, and Lancelot and Guinevere are in love. But of course, it's a tragic love doomed to failure, doomed love. You get it in Boccaccio and Petrarch and these early love poems from the early Renaissance are really about tragic love.
Yes.
When you think of the ideal of romantic love and the possibility of happiness in romantic love, actually, that's a relatively recent phenomenon in literature and culture.
It really is.
It really is.
And if folks think, well, that's just literature, that literature is based on real life. I got to give a huge shout out to Matthew Humphreys, who may be watching this live or might catch it later, but he actually gifted Amy and I a copy of the BBC production ARCUK. And this is interesting. It's a film presentation about Beethoven's Eroica Symphony that he wrote. And it shows you the whole movie is one afternoon. The afternoon when he presents it to his patron, and his patron's got, very wealthy. So he's got his own little orchestra he keeps. They all come to the house, they perform it. But part of the story is Beethoven's great love in his life. The one woman his immortal beloved.
Love it.
Complicated story, but the long and short of it is he never was able to have that romance in his life because she was an aristocrat. She had been married to an aristocrat and had her children. Beethoven was not despite his enormous musical talent and his eventual success, he was not an aristocrat. And by the Austrian laws of the time, if she had gotten together with him, she would have lost her children. She would have lost her place in the aristocracy. And she would have lost her children.
Right.
Modern love versus romance of 200, 300, 400 years ago, an entirely different animal. All the more reason to jump onto a modern holiday like Valentine's Day.
Absolutely. Let's celebrate the greatest values in life. Let's do that. Right? I mean, what kind of life hatred is it where someone has some kind of resentment against, even if they don't have it in their lives? And notice that the power of love can still work in someone like Beethoven. She was still an important muse. She was still an important inspiration to his art. If a man like Beethoven weren't capable of love, would it have affected his music? I think so. And so even if it was unrequited, even if he never found true romantic happiness in his life, and damn that society that would prevent him from marrying above his station, nonetheless, love itself was a positive value even in Beethoven's life. And it may have actually helped give us the value of Beethoven's music.
Absolutely. Christopher Smith says, who was this Für Elise? I think he probably knows that was
well, Elise, I think, was a piano student of his.
Yes, and we know exactly was written as an exercise.
Right, written as an exercise. He was an excellent pianist. He was the leading pianist of his time and a piano teacher. And Elise was just one of his students for which he wrote that piece.
Yeah, it's a piece for a student, so it's so easy, even I can play it.
Right.
I can only play the first and third sections. The middle part is actually really hard. So huge shout out there. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. We hope that you will capitalize not only on the information and the insights that we've shared today, but on Valentine's Day. Whether you have a Valentine in your life right now, friends, family, parents, share the love, put it out there. James, I need to let you go because I know you've got to go to work. And by that, I mean, you've got to prep. You are on again in less than an hour. Stay tuned to the Ayn Rand Center UK. Join us at the top of this coming hour for the question, are cops out of control? Yes, the Daily Objective is going to address this issue with our own legal expert, James Valliant, as well as Mark Pellegrino. That's going to be a good episode. James, I will look forward to seeing that. A huge shout out to all of the supporters. The super chats were especially generous today.
Yes.
Just kind of blew me away here. Everybody, absolutely everybody, but especially Emmanuel, with some great questions. If you're listening to this after the fact, thanks to those of you who give super thanks, who make a contribution, listening to it afterward. We get more listens afterward than we do live, although, live, I love the chat. Love y'all in there. Thank you for joining us. I'm looking forward to Valentine's Day. I'm also looking forward to getting together next Wednesday for another episode of Peikoff Wednesdays and Keeping It Real. James, thank you so much. You picked the best questions. You gave the best answers. This was great.
Thank you, sir. You're always the best too.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Take care.